I was watching the Weather Channel at 3 in the morning when I realized this was going to be the worst blizzard Vermont had seen in 20 years. The meteorologist's voice crackled with barely contained excitement as he pointed to the swirling mass of red and purple on the radar. A monster storm that was already dumping 2 feet of snow on Burlington and heading straight for Maple Ridge, the upscale planned community where I'd lived for the past 5 years. My name is Jensen, and I own the only private snowplowing business that serviced our area of Chittenden County. I'd built my company from the ground up after leaving my corporate job in Boston, trading spreadsheets and conference calls for diesel engines and pre-dawn mornings. Most people thought I was crazy for giving up 6 figures to push snow around, but there was something honest about the work. When a storm hit, people needed you, and you delivered. No politics, no office drama, just you against nature. The phone started ringing at 3:15. My first call was from the elementary school principal, then the grocery store manager, then the medical center. By 4, I had 17 voicemails and my fingers were cramping from typing responses. The storm was already hammering us, wind screaming against my windows hard enough to rattle the frames. I pulled on my insulated coveralls and grabbed my keys, knowing I had maybe a 12-hour marathon ahead of me. My truck was a beast. A 2024 Ford F450 Super Duty with a 9-foot Western plow blade that I'd customized myself, LED light bars that could turn night into day, and a salt spreader that held enough material to treat 3 miles of road. I'd dropped $45,000 on the setup and another $20,000 on the backup truck sitting in my garage. These machines were my livelihood, and I maintained them like they were made of gold. The cold hit me like a punch when I stepped outside. -5 degrees, and with the wind chill, it felt closer to -30. Snow was already piling up fast, at least 4 inches since midnight, and it showed no signs of stopping. I fired up the truck, letting the engine rumble to life with that deep diesel growl that never got old. The plow blade scraped against the driveway as I lowered it, and I was off. I hit the medical center first because that was protocol. Emergency access couldn't wait. The parking lot was a disaster. Cars already buried up to their door handles, and I spent 90 minutes clearing the main routes and emergency vehicle lanes. The staff waved from the windows, and I could see the relief on their faces. One of the ER doctors came out with a thermos of coffee for me, which I accepted gratefully. My fingers were already going numb despite my gloves. By 7 in the morning, I'd cleared the school, 2 grocery stores, and was working on the main roads leading into our commercial district. The snow kept coming, relentless and heavy, the kind of wet, dense snow that could break tree branches and collapse roofs. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. More requests, more desperate people who needed their driveways cleared, their businesses accessible, their elderly parents dug out. I was on Hillside Avenue, working on a steep residential section when I got the call that changed everything. It was Margaret Chen, the owner of Riverside Nursing Home on the east side of town. Her voice was shaking. "Marcus, we have a situation. We've got a resident having a cardiac event and the ambulance can't get through. Our access road is completely blocked and the county plow won't be here for hours. They're tied up on the highways." My stomach dropped. "I'm 20 minutes away. I'll be there as fast as I can." I flipped on my emergency flashers and pushed the truck as hard as I dared on the snow-covered roads. The nursing home was at the end of a quarter-mile private drive that wound through a wooded area. When I got there, I understood why the ambulance was stuck. A massive pine tree had come down across the road, weighted down by snow, and behind it was a drift that had to be 5 feet high. The ambulance was sitting at the entrance, lights flashing, paramedics standing outside looking helpless. I didn't waste time. I radioed in my location, dropped my plow and started pushing. The snow was so deep that I had to take it in layers, backing up and ramming forward, the truck's engine roaring with effort. It took me 40 minutes to clear enough of a path, and by the time I moved to the fallen tree, 2 of the paramedics had gotten chainsaws from the nursing home's maintenance shed. Together, we cut and pushed until there was just enough room for the ambulance to squeeze through. The paramedics didn't say much, just nodded their thanks and took off toward the building. I followed, clearing the parking lot and the turnaround area so they'd be able to get back out with the patient. When they emerged 18 minutes later with an elderly man on a gurney, oxygen mask over his face, I was finishing up the last section. The lead paramedic gave me a thumbs up as they loaded the patient and drove away. Margaret came out as I was clearing the last of the snow from the entrance. She was crying, mascara running down her cheeks. "You saved his life," she said. "If they couldn't get to him, he wouldn't have made it. Thank you." I told her it was just my job, but the weight of what had just happened settled on me. This was why I did this work. This was why it mattered. By noon, I'd been plowing for 8 straight hours. My back ached, my eyes burned from staring at white on white, and I'd gone through 2 thermoses of coffee. The snow was still coming down, though the intensity had backed off slightly. The forecast said we'd get another 6 inches before it tapered off in the evening. I needed fuel, food, and a bathroom break, not necessarily in that order. I pulled into the quick stop on Route 15, one of the few gas stations that stayed open during storms. While the truck's tank filled, I grabbed a sandwich and a bag of chips from inside, along with another coffee that was probably my 6th of the day. The clerk, a kid named Devin who couldn't have been more than 19, looked exhausted. "You're a lifesaver, man," he said as he rang me up. "My mom called from Maple Ridge. She said you cleared her street this morning. She's got that physical therapy appointment she can't miss tomorrow, and now she'll actually be able to get out." Maple Ridge. My own neighborhood. In all the chaos, I hadn't even thought about clearing my own community. I lived in the Pineview section, one of the 3 subdivisions that made up the Maple Ridge planned community. The whole development was managed by the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, a group that had been a thorn in my side since I'd moved in. They had rules for everything. What color you could paint your house, how tall your grass could be, where you could park, what kind of mailbox you could have. I'd racked up fines for leaving my work truck in my driveway overnight, for having a small oil stain on my garage floor that was visible when the door was open, and for putting up Christmas lights 2 days before the approved date. The HOA president was a woman named Patricia Hutchins, though everyone called her Patty behind her back, and sometimes to her face if they were feeling brave. She was 52, drove a white BMW X5, and had apparently made it her life's mission to ensure that every single resident of Maple Ridge followed every single rule in the Covenant book, which was 73 pages long. I'd read it. Twice. Once when I bought the house, and once when she'd fined me $100 for leaving my recycling bin visible from the street 4 hours past collection time. Patty had been after me for months about my snowplow. According to her interpretation of the covenants, commercial vehicles weren't allowed to be parked in residential driveways or streets overnight. Never mind that half our neighbors had company logos on their work vans, or that the doctor 3 doors down had a fully wrapped vehicle advertising his dermatology practice. No, Patty had decided that my snowplow truck was an eyesore and a violation, and she wanted it gone. We'd gone back and forth. I'd pointed out that the covenant defined commercial vehicles as those primarily used for business purposes that alter the residential character of the neighborhood. My truck was a pickup, modified for snow removal, and I argued it was no different from any other pickup truck with a trailer hitch or ladder rack. She disagreed. The HOA board had sided with her in a split vote, 3-2, and I'd been given a notice that I needed to remove the commercial vehicle or face escalating fines and eventual legal action. The thing was, I had nowhere else to keep it. I'd looked into storage facilities, but the only ones large enough and close enough were commercial lots that cost $800 a month. For a parking space, my mortgage was less than that. I tried to explain to Patty that during storm season, I needed the truck immediately accessible. Minutes could matter in an emergency, and driving across town to get my vehicle could mean the difference between life and death for someone who needed medical access. She'd told me that wasn't her problem. The rules were the rules. So I'd started parking the truck in my garage, even though it was a tight squeeze and I had to move everything else out to fit it. The backup truck stayed at a buddy's property outside the development. It was inconvenient and ridiculous, but it kept Patty off my back. As I drove back into Maple Ridge that afternoon, I could see that the neighborhood was in bad shape. The development's private roads hadn't been touched. Snow was piled up everywhere, cars were buried, and several people were out with shovels, trying to clear their driveways by hand in the midst of an ongoing blizzard. That was a fool's errand. By the time they finished, another 3 inches would have fallen. I recognized a few of my neighbors. There was Bill Morrison, the retired teacher from 2 streets over, looking red-faced and winded as he heaved snow off his driveway. There was young Amanda Cooper with her newborn, trying to dig out her car with one hand while holding the baby carrier in the other. And there was elderly Mr. Patel, who had to be pushing 80, chipping away at the ice on his front steps with a metal scraper. My street, Oakmont Drive, was completely impassable. The main entrance to Pineview had maybe a foot of clearance, and that was only because a few people had driven through earlier, packing it down. I pulled up to my house and sat there for a moment, staring at my garage door. The truck fit, barely, but I needed to clear my own driveway first, and that meant dropping the plow. Here's where things got complicated. The HOA rules specifically prohibited using commercial vehicles in the neighborhood during certain hours, and technically, operating a snowplow in a residential area could be considered commercial activity. Patty had made that argument to me before when I'd helped a neighbor clear their driveway during a smaller storm. But it was 1 in the afternoon, well within allowed hours, and this was clearly an emergency situation. I made a judgment call. I dropped the plow and started clearing my driveway. Then, because I wasn't a jerk, I cleared my immediate neighbors' driveways too. The Williamsons on my left were both essential workers at the hospital, and they'd been gone since before the storm hit. The Crafts on my right were an elderly couple who definitely shouldn't be shoveling. It took me maybe 40 minutes total. I was finishing up when I saw the white BMW coming down the street, moving slowly but deliberately through the snow. Patty, of course. The woman had a 6th sense for covenant violations. She stopped in the middle of the street, put on her hazard lights, and got out. She was wearing designer snow boots that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill, and a cream-colored parka with fur trim. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her expression was the one I'd come to recognize. Lips pursed, eyes narrowed, the look of someone who'd found a mouse in their pantry. "Mr. Jensen," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the wind. "What do you think you're doing?" I turned off the truck and climbed down. My patience was already thin from the long morning. Clearing snow, Patty. There's a blizzard, in case you hadn't noticed. I noticed that you're operating a commercial vehicle in violation of our covenants, she said, pulling out her phone. She started taking pictures of my truck, the plow blade, the cleared driveways. This is a commercial snow removal vehicle, and you're conducting business in a residential zone during restricted hours. Restricted hours. It's 1 in the afternoon, and I'm not conducting business. I'm clearing my own driveway. And your neighbor's driveways, she pointed out. Are they paying you for this service? No, Patty, I'm being a decent human being. People need help. That's not the point. The covenants are very clear. Commercial vehicles are not to be operated within the development. You've been warned multiple times about this. The board has been more than patient with you. I could feel my temper rising, that hot flush of anger that started in my chest and worked its way up. Let me get this straight. We're in the middle of the worst storm in 2 decades. People are stuck in their homes, and you're worried about covenant violations. I'm worried about maintaining property values and community standards, she said coldly. If we let one person break the rules, everyone will think they can break them. That's how neighborhoods decline. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Patty, have you looked around? The streets are impassable. People can't get out. If there's an emergency, if someone needs an ambulance or a fire truck, they won't be able to get through. The county isn't going to plow private development roads for hours, maybe days. We need to clear these streets. That's what the HOA's contracted snow service is for, she said. I've already put in a call to them. They'll be here as soon as they can. Who'd you contract with? Superior Snow Services out of Burlington. They've done excellent work for us in the past. I knew Superior. They were a big company, ran 30 trucks, mostly handled commercial properties and large developments. They were also expensive and spread thin during major storms. Patty, Superior is going to be slammed. They've got dozens of clients. We could be waiting 12, 24 hours before they get here. Then we wait, she said simply. In the meantime, I need you to cease operating this vehicle immediately and park it out of sight. If you refuse, I'll have no choice but to issue a fine and call for emergency towing. That stopped me cold. You're going to what? The covenants give the HOA board emergency authority to remove vehicles that pose a threat to community safety or violate critical ordinances. Your commercial vehicle qualifies on both counts. If you don't comply, I'll have it towed. I stared at her, trying to figure out if she was serious. The look on her face said she was. Patty, that's insane. You're talking about towing the only available snowplow in the neighborhood during a blizzard because of a technicality. It's not a technicality. It's the covenant that every homeowner signed when they purchased their property, including you. I wanted to argue more, but my phone was ringing. It was the hospital again, asking if I could clear their staff parking lot. Then another call came in from the fire station. Their backup bay door was frozen shut, and they needed help digging it out. I had a choice. Stand here arguing with Patty about HOA rules or go do my job and help people who actually needed it. Fine, I said, climbing back into the truck. Have it your way. But when people are stuck here and can't get out, that's on you. They'll be fine, she said dismissively. Everyone can wait a few hours. I left, the anger simmering in my gut. The sheer stupidity of the situation was staggering. We had a genuine emergency, and the HOA president was more concerned about covenant enforcement than public safety. But I had other priorities. The fire station was waiting, and then I had the hospital run, and after that, a list of clients that stretched into the evening. The next 6 hours were brutal. I plowed the fire station, the hospital parking lot again, 3 medical office buildings, 2 church parking lots where warming centers had been set up, and more residential streets than I could count. My phone never stopped ringing. The requests kept piling up faster than I could handle them. The backup truck would have been useful, but it was 20 minutes away at my friend's property, and I didn't have time to go get it. By 7 that evening, the snow had finally stopped. The storm had dumped a total of 31 inches on our area, with drifts up to 6 feet in some places. The temperature had dropped to -12, and the wind chill was approaching -40. Dangerous, potentially deadly weather for anyone stuck outside. I was exhausted, running on fumes and caffeine when I finally headed back toward Maple Ridge. I'd been plowing for 16 straight hours. My hands were locked in a permanent curve from gripping the steering wheel. My shoulders screamed every time I moved, and I was pretty sure I'd developed a headache that would last for days. But the job was done. The critical infrastructure was clear, emergency routes were passable, and most of my regular clients were taken care of. When I turned onto the main entrance to Maple Ridge, I immediately knew something was wrong. There were cars backed up at the entrance, maybe a dozen of them, people standing outside in the brutal cold, arguing and gesturing. I could see the problem right away. The entrance road was completely blocked by a massive snow drift that had blown across from the adjacent field. No one was getting in or out. I recognized several of my neighbors in the crowd. Bill Morrison was there, still in his work clothes, trying to explain to Patty that he'd been stuck at school for 3 extra hours and just wanted to get home. Amanda Cooper was there with her baby, the infant crying in the cold, while Amanda begged Patty to let someone plow the entrance. Mr. Patel was in his car, looking pale and shaken. Patty was standing in front of her BMW, arms crossed, looking frustrated but defiant. "Superior will be here soon," she was saying. "They confirmed they're on their way, we just need to be patient." "It's been 7 hours," Bill shouted. 7 hours, and they haven't shown up. We can't wait anymore. People need to get home. "I understand that, but we have procedures. We can't just let anyone plow our streets. We have standards." I parked the truck and walked over. Several neighbors saw me and their expressions changed to relief. "Marcus," Amanda called out, "can you clear this, please? My baby is freezing." I was about to say yes when Patty stepped forward, placing herself between me and the entrance. "Mr. Jensen, I thought I made myself clear this afternoon. Commercial vehicles are not permitted to operate in this community. Patty, people need to get home. And they will as soon as our contracted service arrives." "When will that be?" She hesitated just for a second, but I caught it. "They said they're en route." "You don't know, do you? They're not coming tonight." "They'll be here," she insisted, but her voice wavered. I pulled out my phone and called Jimmy Rodriguez, the owner of Superior Snow Services. I'd known Jimmy for years. We'd worked together on some large contracts before I went independent. He answered on the third ring, sounding completely fried. "Marcus, hey, can't talk long, I'm drowning here." "Quick question, Jimmy, you got a contract for Maple Ridge Development?" "Yeah, but we're not getting there until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest, maybe evening. We're running 30 hours behind. It's a nightmare." "Can you tell their HOA president that?" There was a pause. "She's been calling every hour. I told her the same thing each time. We'll get there when we get there." I thanked him and hung up, then turned to Patty. "Tomorrow afternoon at the earliest, that's another 20 hours. Are you really going to make everyone wait that long?" The crowd's murmur turned angry. Bill stepped forward. "Patty, this is ridiculous. Marcus is right here. He's got the equipment. Let him clear the damn road." "It's not that simple," Patty said, but she was losing control of the situation. "There are liability issues, insurance concerns, covenant requirements." "My baby is freezing," Amanda said, her voice breaking. "Please." I could see Patty doing the math, trying to figure out how to save face while giving in. But before she could respond, Mr. Patel suddenly slumped forward in his car. Someone screamed. I ran over and yanked open the door. The elderly man was unconscious, his breathing shallow. "Call 911, I shouted. Someone was already dialing. I checked his pulse, which was weak but present. "He's hypothermic. We need to warm him up now." Bill and another neighbor helped me get Mr. Patel into the back of someone's running car with the heat blasted. I wrapped him in every coat and blanket we could find. The 911 operator said an ambulance was coming, but they were dealing with multiple emergencies across the county. It could be 30 minutes or more. "They can't get here if the road's blocked," I said, looking directly at Patty. "Neither can we get him out to them." For the first time since I'd known her, Patty looked uncertain. The confidence had drained from her face, replaced by something that might have been fear. She was realizing that her devotion to the covenants had created a genuine crisis. "Clear the road," she said quietly. "What was that?" I said. I wanted to hear her say it clearly. "Clear the road, Mr. Jensen, please." I didn't waste any more time. I got back in the truck, dropped the blade, and attacked the drift. It was dense, packed by the wind, and it took 3 passes to break through. Then I cleared the entrance area and made a path wide enough for emergency vehicles. The whole thing took 20 minutes. The ambulance arrived 18 minutes later. The paramedics treated Mr. Patel and determined he needed to go to the hospital for observation. His core temperature had dropped dangerously low. They said if we'd waited much longer, it could have been fatal. After the ambulance left, the crowd dispersed. Everyone headed to their homes, grateful to finally get inside and warm. I was about to follow when Patty approached me. She looked smaller somehow, less sure of herself. "Thank you," she said, "for helping with Mr. Patel." I nodded but didn't say anything. I was too tired and too angry. "I'd like to discuss the snow removal situation," she continued. "Perhaps we can come to an arrangement where you could clear the neighborhood tonight and we can address the covenant issues at a later date." "No," I said. She blinked, surprised. "No. You had your chance, Patty. You chose the covenants over common sense. I'm done." "But the neighborhood needs to be cleared. The side streets are still impassable." "Then wait for Superior. That's what you wanted." "They won't be here until tomorrow. You heard them. People need help now. And I needed you to be reasonable this afternoon. Instead, you threatened to tow my truck. So now we wait." I started walking to my truck, but she followed me. "Mr. Jensen, please, I'm asking you to help your neighbors." "I've been helping people all day, Patty." I pulled a tree off a road so a man having a heart attack could get to the hospital. I dug out a fire station. I cleared nursing homes and medical centers and schools. I've been working for 17 hours straight. And when I tried to help my own neighborhood, you threatened me with fines and towing. So excuse me if I'm not feeling particularly charitable right now." "I made a mistake," she said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. "I admit it. I was too focused on the rules. But people are counting on us. They're counting on you. You're the HOA president. This is your responsibility." I climbed into my truck, but before I could close the door, she grabbed it. "What will it take? You want me to waive the commercial vehicle restrictions? Done. You want me to drop the fines? Consider them dropped. Just please help us clear the neighborhood." I paused, considering. On one hand, I was furious with her and wanted nothing more than to drive away and let her deal with the consequences of her decisions. On the other hand, these were my neighbors we were talking about. People I lived next to, people whose kids played with the neighborhood kids, people who'd brought me casseroles when I moved in and shoveled my walk when I was sick with the flu 2 winters ago. "I want it in writing," I said finally. "A formal amendment to the covenants, approved by the board. exempting necessary snow removal equipment from the commercial vehicle restrictions during winter months. I want all my previous fines refunded, and I want a formal apology from the HOA board for the harassment. Done, she said immediately. I'll call an emergency board meeting tonight. We can have it drafted and voted on by tomorrow. And one more thing. You personally apologize to Mr. Patel and his family for what happened tonight. Your stubbornness almost killed him. She flinched at that but nodded. I will. All right then. Let me get some coffee and something to eat and I'll clear the neighborhood. But Patty, if the board doesn't follow through on what you just promised, I'm gone. I'll move out of this development so fast it'll make your head spin, and you can explain to everyone why the only person with a plow left. We'll follow through, she promised. I went home, microwaved some leftover pizza, and downed another cup of coffee. Every muscle in my body protested as I moved. I was beyond exhausted, running on pure stubbornness at this point. But I'd given my word, and despite everything, I still cared about my neighbors. Starting at 9 p.m., I began clearing the Maple Ridge streets systematically. I worked through Pineview first, making sure every street was passable and every main driveway approach was cleared. People came out to thank me, offering hot chocolate and food and money, which I refused. Bill Morrison insisted on riding along with me to help guide me to the worst spots, and I appreciated the company. He also filled me in on the neighborhood gossip. Patty's been on thin ice with the board for a while, he said as we turned onto Willow Lane. She's so obsessed with rule enforcement that she's forgotten what an HOA is supposed to be about. It's supposed to make the community better, not turn us into some kind of prison camp. There's been talk of voting her out, but no one wanted to deal with the drama. What changed? Tonight changed things. When people heard that she tried to stop you from plowing during an emergency, they were furious. I heard at least 5 people saying they're going to demand her resignation at the next meeting. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Part of me thought Patty deserved whatever she got, but another part of me recognized that she'd been genuinely trying to do what she thought was right. She was just so rigid in her thinking that she couldn't see past the rules to the people they were supposed to serve. By midnight, I'd cleared Pineview. My back felt like it was made of broken glass, and I was hallucinating slightly from exhaustion. Colors seemed too bright, and I kept seeing movement in my peripheral vision that wasn't there. Bill had gone home an hour earlier, nearly falling asleep in the passenger seat. I moved on to the Meadowbrook section of the development. At 1:30 in the morning, as I was finishing a cul-de-sac, my headlights caught movement. I slowed down and saw Patty standing outside a house, talking to a couple. They looked upset, and Patty seemed to be apologizing. I later learned that this was the Hendersons, who'd been stuck outside the development for hours because Mrs. Henderson worked the evening shift at the hospital and couldn't get home. Patty was going door to door, personally apologizing to everyone who'd been affected by her decisions. I finished Meadowbrook around 3 a.m. The last section, Riverside Estates, took until 5:30. When I finally plowed the last street and cleared the last driveway approach, the sun was starting to rise, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful in that surreal way that only comes when you're so tired you're not entirely sure what's real anymore. I parked the truck in my garage, stumbled into my house and collapsed on the couch without even taking off my boots. I was asleep in seconds. I woke up to someone pounding on my door. According to my phone, it was 1 in the afternoon. I'd slept for less than 8 hours, and my body felt like it had been run over by the very truck I'd been driving. Everything hurt. Muscles I didn't even know I had were screaming at me. The pounding continued. I dragged myself off the couch and opened the door to find Bill Morrison standing there with a covered dish and a huge grin. "You're a legend," he said, pushing past me into the house. "The whole neighborhood is talking about you." "Patty called an emergency board meeting this morning and they passed your amendment unanimously. She also resigned as president. That woke me up." "She what?" "Resigned. Said she'd lost perspective and that the community deserved better leadership. It was actually pretty classy. The board voted to make me interim president until the next election." He set the covered dish on my kitchen counter. "My wife made you lasagna. Consider it a thank you from everyone." I was still processing the news about Patty. "Is she okay?" "She's fine. Embarrassed, I think, but fine. She's been calling everyone she threatened or fined over the past year, apologizing and issuing refunds. Apparently last night was a wake-up call for her." We talked for a few more minutes, and Bill filled me in on the amended covenant language. It was exactly what I'd asked for. A clear exemption for snow removal equipment during designated winter months, with the caveat that the equipment had to be used primarily for neighborhood benefit during emergencies. It was fair and sensible. After Bill left, I checked my phone. I had 43 text messages and 16 voicemails. Most were thank you notes from neighbors. Several were new job requests, and 3 were from local news stations asking for interviews about the hero snowplow operator who saved a neighborhood during the blizzard. I ignored the news requests. I wasn't interested in being on TV, but I did respond to the thank you messages and the job requests. Work was work, and I had a business to run. Over the next few days, things slowly returned to normal. The county finally got the main roads fully cleared. Superior Snow Services eventually showed up at Maple Ridge, 2 days late, and was surprised to find everything already done. Jimmy Rodriguez called me personally to thank me for covering his contract, though I explained it had been a unique situation. Mr. Patel recovered fully from his hypothermia scare and made a point of bringing me a box of his wife's homemade samosas, which were incredible. We sat in my living room and talked for an hour about his career as an engineer and his grandchildren and his frustration with the HOA's rigid rules. He was a good man, and I was glad he was okay. The story didn't end there, though. It turned out that Patty's decision to threaten me with towing during an emergency wasn't just bad judgment. It was potentially illegal. One of my neighbors, a lawyer named Steve Brennan, had taken it upon himself to research the matter. He discovered that Vermont law specifically prohibited HOAs from interfering with emergency services or preventing reasonable access during declared emergencies. The governor had declared a state of emergency before the storm even hit, which meant that Patty's threat to tow my vehicle could be construed as interference with emergency services. Steve brought this to my attention over coffee at the local diner. "I'm not saying you should sue," he said carefully, "but you'd have a very strong case if you wanted to. What she did was at best a gross violation of her fiduciary duty as HOA president, and at worst, it was criminal interference." I thought about it. The vindictive part of me wanted to see Patty face consequences for what she'd done. She'd made my life difficult for years, and her actions during the storm could have resulted in someone's death. But the practical part of me knew that a lawsuit would be expensive, time-consuming, and would turn the neighborhood into a war zone. "I'm going to pass," I told Steve. "She resigned, the covenants are fixed, and I got my fines refunded. That's enough for me." Steve nodded, looking relieved. "I think that's the right call, but if she ever causes problems again, keep this in your back pocket." 3 weeks after the storm, the HOA held a community meeting. It was the first one I'd actually attended in 2 years, mostly because I'd always been working during the scheduled times. The meeting was held at the Maple Ridge Clubhouse, a nice facility with a big common room and a kitchen. About 60 people showed up, which was a large turnout for our development. Bill Morrison, now officially the interim president, ran the meeting efficiently. We covered standard business, budget updates, maintenance schedules, upcoming community events. Then he got to the topic everyone was really there to discuss. "I want to address what happened during the January blizzard," Bill said, standing at the front of the room. "We had a situation where our contracted snow service was unable to reach us in a timely manner, and our community was left in a potentially dangerous position. Through the efforts of our neighbor Marcus Jensen, we were able to resolve the situation and ensure everyone's safety." There was applause. I felt my face get hot. I wasn't used to being the center of attention like this, Bill continued. "However, the incident exposed some serious flaws in how we've been managing the HOA. We had rules that were too rigid, enforcement that was too aggressive, and leadership that had lost sight of the community's actual needs. That's going to change." He outlined a series of reforms the board had approved. They were reducing the covenant book from 73 pages to 32, eliminating what Bill called petty nonsense rules that served no real purpose. They were implementing a common-sense exception policy for emergencies. They were changing the fine structure to focus on education and compliance rather than punishment. And they were revamping the board election process to include term limits and require more community input. "We're also establishing a community emergency response plan," Bill said. "Part of that plan includes officially designating Marcus as our primary snow removal contractor, with compensation to be paid from the HOA's maintenance budget. He'll be on call during storm events to ensure our streets stay passable." More applause. I hadn't known about this part, and I was genuinely surprised. Bill caught my eye and grinned. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to shake my hand and thank me again. Patricia Hutchins, Patty, was there too. She hung back until most people had left, then approached me hesitantly. "Mr. Jensen," she said, "I owe you an apology, a real one, not just the formal one I gave at the board meeting." "Okay," I said, waiting. "I was wrong about everything. The commercial vehicle restrictions, the fines, the way I treated you during the storm. I was so focused on maintaining what I thought were standards that I forgot we're supposed to be a community. People matter more than rules. I forgot that." She looked like she'd aged 5 years in 3 weeks. The rigid confidence was gone, replaced by something more humble and uncertain. "I spent the last few weeks really thinking about why I acted the way I did," she continued. "I think I was trying to control something in my life. My marriage fell apart 2 years ago. My kids are grown and gone, and I was lonely. The HOA gave me purpose and power, and I abused both." That's not an excuse, just an explanation. I didn't know what to say. I'd spent so long being angry at her that I'd never considered she might be dealing with her own problems. "I'm working on being better," she said. "I'm seeing a therapist. I'm trying to reconnect with my kids. And I'm trying to figure out how to be part of this community without trying to control every aspect of it." "That's good," I said. "I think that's really good. For what it's worth, you were right about all of it, and I'm genuinely sorry for the trouble I caused you." We shook hands. It wasn't quite forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Over the following months, Maple Ridge transformed. The new covenant rules were fair and reasonable. The board started actually listening to residents' concerns. Community events became more frequent and better attended. And most surprisingly, Patty started volunteering at the clubhouse, helping organize social events and neighborhood cleanups. She seemed happier, more relaxed, more like a real person instead of the covenant enforcement robot she'd been before. As for me, Business was booming. The story of the blizzard had spread through word of mouth and social media, and I was getting calls from all over the county. I hired 2 additional drivers and bought another truck. The contract with Maple Ridge was lucrative and reliable, covering my base costs during the winter months and letting me be more selective about other jobs. The next winter was mild, with only a few small storms. I kept my trucks maintained and ready, but they didn't get nearly the workout they had during the big blizzard. The neighborhood appreciated having me on call anyway, and the few times we did get snow, I had the streets cleared before most people woke up. In March of that year, the HOA held elections for permanent board positions. Bill Morrison won the presidency by a landslide. 2 other reasonable, level-headed neighbors won the other contested seats. The new board continued the reforms, and Maple Ridge became known in the area as one of the most well-managed and resident-friendly developments around. Property values actually went up, which was ironic considering Patty's original justification for strict enforcement had been maintaining property values. Turned out people were willing to pay more to live in a community that treated them like adults instead of prisoners. On the 1-year anniversary of the blizzard, the HOA threw a community party at the clubhouse. It was well attended, with food and music and kids running around. Someone had made a photo collage of images from the storm, including several shots of my truck clearing the streets. I stood there looking at those photos, remembering how exhausted and angry I'd been and felt a strange sense of pride. Bill came up beside me, holding a beer. "Hard to believe it's been a year." "Yeah," I agreed. "You changed this place, not just by plowing the streets. You made us realize what we'd become, and you gave us a chance to be better." "I just did my job. You did more than that. You reminded us that communities are about people helping people, not rules and regulations." The party went late into the evening. At one point, I found myself talking to Patty by the dessert table. She'd brought homemade cookies that were actually pretty good. "How are you doing?" I asked. "Better," she said. "Much better. I'm actually dating someone, Gary, from over in Meadowbrook. He's kind and patient and doesn't care that I used to be the neighborhood villain." I laughed. "You weren't a villain, Patty. You were just lost for a while. Maybe, but I found my way back, thanks in part to you." "I think you found your way back on your own. I just provided the catalyst." As I drove home that night, my street clear and dry under the early spring stars, I thought about the journey the past year had been. I'd moved to Maple Ridge looking for a quieter life, a place to build my business and be part of a community. What I'd found instead was a rigid, rule-obsessed HOA that made life difficult for everyone. But when crisis hit, when the storm came and people needed help, the true character of the community revealed itself. And it turned out that under all those rules and regulations, under the covenant enforcement and the fines and the threats, there were good people who wanted to do right by each other. The Snowplow incident had been a turning point, forcing everyone to reevaluate what really mattered. In the end, it wasn't about property values or covenant compliance or maintaining appearances. It was about neighbors helping neighbors, about putting people before policies, about remembering that a community is only as strong as its willingness to take care of its own. My phone buzzed with a weather alert. Another storm system was moving in, expected to hit in 2 days. This one looked smaller, maybe 6 to 8 inches, nothing like the monster we'd dealt with the previous year. But I'd be ready, and so would the neighborhood. I pulled into my driveway, noting with satisfaction that my snowplow truck sat there, visible and unchallenged. No threatening letters from the HOA, no fines, no hassles. Just a truck doing honest work for people who needed it. That night, I slept well, knowing that when the snow came, I'd be ready. And more importantly, knowing that I lived in a community that had learned from its mistakes and come out stronger on the other side. The covenants still existed, but they served the people now instead of the other way around. The HOA still had rules, but they were reasonable ones enforced with common sense and compassion. And somewhere in a house 3 streets over, Patricia Hutchins was probably sleeping well too, no longer burdened by the weight of trying to control everything, finally at peace with being just another member of the community instead of its self-appointed guardian. The storm came 2 days later, right on schedule. 8 inches of heavy, wet snow that fell overnight and into the early morning. By the time most of my neighbors woke up, their streets were already clear, the snow pushed to the sides in neat banks, driveways accessible, life able to continue without interruption. I got a few thank you texts, but mostly people just went about their days, confident that their neighborhood was taken care of. That was how it should be. Emergency response shouldn't be dramatic or newsworthy. It should be reliable and expected, part of the infrastructure that lets communities function. As spring fully arrived and the last of the snow melted away, I found myself reflecting on what the whole experience had taught me. I'd learned that standing up for common sense was worth it, even when it meant conflict. I'd learned that people could change when confronted with the consequences of their actions. I'd learned that communities were resilient and that given the chance, most people would choose to do the right thing. I'd also learned that sometimes the most valuable thing you could offer wasn't just a service, but a catalyst for change. My snowplow hadn't just cleared streets. It had cleared away years of accumulated resentment and dysfunction, creating space for something better to grow. The following year brought changes beyond just the HOA. The county, impressed by how well Maple Ridge had handled the emergency, reached out to develop a partnership program with private contractors for future storm events. I became one of their designated responders, meaning I could be called upon to assist with critical infrastructure during major weather events. It came with some additional insurance requirements and training, but also guaranteed income and the satisfaction of knowing I was part of a larger emergency response network. My business continued to grow. I hired another driver, then another. We expanded beyond just snow removal, offering year-round property maintenance services. The company I'd started as a one-man operation was becoming a real enterprise, with employees and benefits and growth potential. But I never forgot that night in the blizzard, standing in the cold arguing with Patty while our neighbor collapsed from hypothermia. That was the moment everything changed, the moment when theory met reality and reality won. It was a lesson I carried with me in every decision I made for the business and for my life. The Maple Ridge community continued to thrive under its reformed leadership. Bill Morrison proved to be an excellent HOA president, balancing the need for community standards with respect for individual freedom. The covenants were living documents now, reviewed annually and updated based on resident feedback. Fines were rare and usually reserved for truly egregious violations. Most issues were resolved through conversation and compromise. Patty remained active in the community, but in a different capacity. She organized the neighborhood book club, coordinated the annual yard sale, and volunteered at the local food bank. She and Gary got engaged that summer, and the whole neighborhood turned out for their backyard wedding. It was a beautiful ceremony, full of joy and second chances. I stood in the crowd watching them exchange vows, and I thought about how far we'd all come. A year and a half earlier, Patty and I had been adversaries, locked in a battle over covenants and commercial vehicles. Now we were neighbors in the truest sense, people who'd weathered a storm together and come out better for it. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Winters brought snow and work, and the satisfaction of knowing I was providing an essential service. Summers brought maintenance contracts and time to actually enjoy the Vermont landscape that had drawn me here in the first place. The mountains, the lakes, the small-town charm that existed alongside just enough modern convenience to make life comfortable. I dated occasionally, nothing serious, though there was a woman named Emily Dixon who worked at the veterinary clinic in town. We'd gone out a few times, and there was potential there, something worth exploring. She understood the demands of my work because her job had similar, unpredictable emergencies. She'd been called in at 2 in the morning to handle a difficult calving more than once, so she got it when my phone rang in the middle of dinner, and I had to leave to handle a snow emergency. 3 years after the big blizzard, another major storm threatened Vermont. This one was projected to be even worse, potentially 36 inches with high winds and dangerous cold. The forecast had everyone nervous, and the governor declared a state of emergency 2 days in advance. This time, things were different. The county had a coordinated response plan. Private contractors like me were integrated into the emergency services network. Communication channels were established. Resource allocation was planned. And most importantly, communities like Maple Ridge had learned from past mistakes. Bill called me a week before the storm was expected to hit. "We want to make sure we're prepared," he said. "What do you need from us?" We discussed logistics, staging areas, priority routes, and communication protocols. The HOA authorized emergency funds to hire 2 additional temporary drivers that I could call in if needed. They also approved setting up a warming station at the clubhouse, stocked with supplies and staffed by volunteers. When the storm hit, it was indeed massive. 38 inches fell over 48 hours, with wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. But we were ready. I coordinated with 3 other drivers, and we worked in shifts to keep the critical routes clear. The county plow drivers knew which private developments had their own coverage, so they could focus on the main arteries. Emergency services never got blocked in. At Maple Ridge, the streets were passable throughout the storm. Not completely clear, that would have been impossible, but passable enough that emergency vehicles could get through if needed. The warming station at the clubhouse served hot meals and provided shelter for several residents whose homes lost power. The community came together in a way that would have been unthinkable 3 years earlier. When the storm finally passed and the cleanup began, I was exhausted but satisfied. We'd handled it. All of us, working together, had faced down a monster storm and kept everyone safe. The local news did run a story this time, but it wasn't about me specifically. It was about the coordinated emergency response and how communities across the county had prepared and executed their plans. Maple Ridge was featured as an example of effective HOA management during crisis, with Bill Morrison explaining how they'd learned from past mistakes and built something better. In the interview, which I watched from my living room while my body slowly remembered how to function after 2 days of minimal sleep, Bill said something that stuck with me. A community isn't defined by its rules or its property values. It's defined by how people treat each other when things get hard. We learned that lesson the hard way, but we learned it well. I thought about sending him a text to say how right he was, but decided action spoke louder than words. Instead, I made a donation to the Warming Station Fund and volunteered to help with the post-storm cleanup efforts. Over the years that followed, Maple Ridge became something special. Not perfect, no place is perfect, but genuinely good. A place where people knew their neighbors, looked out for each other, and understood that community was something you built together, not something imposed from above through rules and regulations. The snowplow stayed parked in my driveway, a symbol of both the work I did and the changes that work had catalyzed. Kids in the neighborhood thought it was cool, and more than once I'd found drawings of it taped to my garage door, crayon sketches labeled Mr. Marcus's super truck. I kept those drawings. They reminded me that what I did mattered, not just in the practical sense of clearing snow, but in the larger sense of being part of something bigger than myself. I was part of a community that had learned and grown and become better. And while I couldn't take full credit for that transformation, I knew I'd played a role. The vindication I'd felt that night when Patty resigned, when the covenants were changed and the fines refunded, had long since faded into something more substantial. Pride, maybe, but quiet pride. The kind that came from knowing you'd done the right thing, stood up for common sense, and helped create positive change. My business continued to thrive, but it never became just about profit. Every winter when the first snow fell, I thought about elderly Mr. Patel slumped in his car, about Amanda Cooper's crying baby in the freezing cold, about all the ways that rigid adherence to rules could create genuine harm. And I made sure that my company's emergency response protocols prioritized human need over everything else. We developed a policy of providing free emergency snow removal to seniors and disabled residents, funded by charging slightly more to commercial clients who could afford it. It was good business and the right thing to do, which turned out to be compatible more often than people expected. Emily, Dixon, and I eventually got serious. She moved into my house in Maple Ridge, bringing her 2 cats and her collection of veterinary textbooks and her warm laugh that made even the coldest winter morning feel manageable. We got married in a small ceremony at the clubhouse, with the whole neighborhood invited. Patty helped organize it, and it was perfect. Life moved on, seasons changed, storms came and went. The big blizzard that had changed everything became part of the community's shared history, a story told to new residents and remembered by old ones. The snowplow that Patty had once threatened to tow became a neighborhood fixture, as familiar and reliable as the street signs and the mailboxes. And me. I found what I'd been looking for when I left Boston all those years ago. Purpose, community, a life built on honest work and genuine relationships. The corporate world had never offered me that. But here, in a small Vermont development with a reformed HOA and neighbors who'd learned to value people over property values, I'd found home. Sometimes, on quiet winter mornings when the snow was falling softly and the world was hushed and peaceful, I'd sit in my truck before heading out to plow, drinking my coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up. Lights coming on in windows, smoke rising from chimneys, people starting their days secure in the knowledge that their streets would be clear and their community would function. That was what it was all about, really. Not the drama of the big blizzard or the confrontation with the HOA or even the reforms that followed. It was about this: quiet mornings and functioning communities and people taking care of each other. The rest was just noise. The snowplow's engine rumbled to life, ready for another day's work. Another storm, another chance to serve, another opportunity to be part of something larger than myself. I dropped the blade, flicked on the lights, and headed out into the snow-covered streets of Maple Ridge, ready to clear the way forward for my community, just as they'd once helped clear the way forward for me. That was the real story. Not the crisis or the conflict, but what came after. The rebuilding, the growth, the slow, steady work of making something better. It wasn't dramatic or newsworthy, but it was real and it mattered and it endured. And every winter, when the storms came and the snow piled up and the phone started ringing with people who needed help, I was there. Ready. Reliable. Part of the infrastructure that let life continue even when nature did its worst. The snowplow that an HOA president once tried to tow had become the neighborhood's lifeline. And the man who drove it had become part of a community that understood what really mattered. Not rules or covenants or property values, but people helping people, neighbors caring for neighbors, and the quiet dignity of doing good work well. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.